Doings of Doyle is sponsored by Belanger Books, home of the best Sherlock Holmes anthologies featuring today's top Sherlockian authors. Belanger Books is the only authorised publisher of Solar Pond's mysteries, continuing the Sherlock Holmes legacy into the 21st century. Visit them today at belangerbooks.com. Welcome to Doings of Doyle, a podcast dedicated to the works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Professor Challenger, Brigadier Gerard, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. I'm Mark Jones.
And I'm Paul Chapman. And together we'll be exploring Doyle's eclectic bibliography to understand more about the great man's life and work. We'll be discussing his fiction and non-fiction, the well-known and the obscure.
And stopping by Baker Street along the way. You'll find out more at doingsofdoyle.com or follow us at doingsofdoyle.com on Blue Sky. Hello and welcome to episode 58. Today, Paul and I are delighted to welcome to the podcast Phil Cheadle and Ed Bennett, the director and star, respectively, of Selecting a Ghost, a stage adaptation of the Conan Doyle short story, which was performed in Norwood, South London, in November 2024. Phil trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts and has an extensive range of theatre, television and film credits. These include Harry Potter and the Cursed Child in the West End, Harlots, Dark Angel and Silent Witness on television, and the films 1917 and John Carter on the big screen. In addition to his acting career, Phil is the co-founder and artistic director of Two Lines Productions and adapted and directed Selecting a Ghost as an immersive, site-specific production for Stanley Art's Day of the Dead festival last month. Ed's diverse and extensive theatre work has seen him perform with some of the country's leading directors and companies, among them the Royal Shakespeare Company, Theatre Royal Bath and Chichester Festival Theatre. On television he's appeared in ITV's Joan, the Netflix hit Bridgerton, Warner Brothers' Pennyworth and the BBC's Poldark. His film work includes The Laureate, Benediction and Ridley Scott's Napoleon. In Selecting a Ghost, Ed played the grocer-turned-ghost hunter Silas M. Dodd. Phil and Ed, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
And it's a big thank you to Phil in particular because we're recording this on your birthday, so many happy returns and thank you for interrupting the celebrations.
That's fine. I wouldn't be anywhere else, I promise you.
Well, look, let's get started by talking a bit about your backgrounds. As people will have got a sense from the introduction, you've both got really extensive careers. And I wondered, is this the first time that you've worked together and how did you get into the industry?
Well, here's the secret. Ed and I met at RADA. So we trained together at RADA between 2001 and 2004. So we've known each other a very long time now. But this is the first time we've worked together professionally. Yes.
We were always in competition at drama because we could both grow beards quite quickly. We were always, not like yours, Paul, but we could grow beards quite quickly. So we were always in competition for the older parts, who was going to get the best old man in whatever play we were doing at drama school. We knew one of us would get it, but we never knew.
Phil, when did you start Two Lines Productions? Because I think that's a relatively recent development for you.
We created Two Lines during the pandemic. It was myself and my wife, Lisa, who in 2001, when we went into lockdown, we found ourselves, like as a lot of people were, kind of hungry for theatre. And so, we had an idea to stage an online version, actually on Zoom, as we're now talking now, but we created a Zoom production of Waiting for Lefty by Clifford Odets. And that was Arts Council backed, and it involved 9 actors and 9 separate locations. And it was filmed live and streamed and live edited on Zoom. It was quite an extraordinary feat of technology. But so that was our first production back in 2001.
Fantastic. And what was the pandemic like for you then, Ed? Were you participating in this as well?
No, I wasn't cast in Phil's first play. I'd like to say I was busy, but obviously I wasn't because we were down, just didn't want me in it. Well, apart from the kind of terror and weirdness of the whole thing, I did feel like it was an opportunity for everyone in the country to feel what it was like to be an actor. You don't know where the next job was going from, having to spend a lot of time in the house.
So very good. So so tell us how this production for Stanley Arts came about.
So yeah, I was commissioned, or Two Lines were commissioned to create a site-specific original piece of theatre for the Stanley Arts Day of the Dead festival that was occurring back in November. So I put together this show, and I wanted to utilize the Stanley Arts to its fullest extent. It's an extraordinary Grade 2 listed Edwardian building. And the brief was to make it site-specific. So I needed a piece that made the Stanley Arts the centerpiece of the play, which Selecting a Ghost would do. Because the two characters invite the reader into Gorsthorpe Grange, which is where Silas and Matilda, the house they purchase, it made sense that the Stanley Arts would just become Gorsthorpe Grange, which it doubled brilliantly for. I also was specifically drawn to Conan Doyle, and that's what my search for a story began with Conan Doyle because of his links to Norwood and the fact he lived there for 3 years, I think, between 1891 and 1894.
Yeah, that's it.
Right. There we go. So it was about celebrating the area of Norwood. It was about celebrating the Stanley Arts. So those two things combined, and then we also collaborated with a hip hop dance group called Bird Gang, who are resident artists at the Stanley Arts. So those three things were why Selecting a Ghost took life.
Yeah, and for those who couldn't see the production, the Stanley Arts venue is a really fantastic Victorian Edwardian building, and you made full use of it because it was a promenade performance, as we'll come back to. But before we do, I just wanted to ask you a question about the process of selecting this particular story. Is this a story that you had heard of, or you automatically had in mind?
No, I hadn't heard of it. In my search was as rudimentary as, because of the Conan Doyle's links, I thought I'll start with his back catalogue. Went on very helpfully to the Conan Doyle Encyclopedia.
Oh, yes.
I saw this one had Ghost in the title, and I was like, this is could work for Day of the Dead. So the search was that crass. But as soon as I read it, I was like, this will work. Yeah, this will work, mainly because it was direct address to an audience. So I could envisage straight away that Silas would welcome the audience to Gorsthorpe Grange, and it would be direct address to the audience because it's first person narration to the audience. And so I immediately saw that it could work for those reasons.
Did the comic potential of the story appeal as well? Because this, Doyle can be very serious at times, but when he lets himself go on comedy, he can be great fun, and this story is a particular example of that.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's such a witty story. I mean, the whole thing is kind of one long joke, really, with a punchline at the end. But within that, it is incredibly witty. So I think that appealed massively. Because it was specifically for the Day of the Dead festival, so it had to incorporate themes around death and afterlife. But I think his humorous approach to the story, we could explore those themes, humorously.
That's right, and I think it's one of the nice things about Selecting a Ghost is that it is both a comedy story, but it also has nods to Conan Doyle's interest in psychical research and his sort of early interest in spiritualism, which was a feature of his life at the time that he was living in Norwood. So when you came to adapting Selecting a Ghost, did you have to make any particular changes?
Yes, yeah, I did. Because it's written from Silas's perspective, there are no other characters that make direct appearances in the story, but they are referenced. So specifically, his wife Matilda is mentioned quite a lot, and he recounts conversations they had. Particularly those moments where he recounts a conversation they had, I was like, that could become a scene, but I need to give Matilda more of a voice, which was tricky. I didn't want to change any of the text. I didn't want to add any of my own dialogue because it wouldn't have been as good as Conan Doyle's. So, but what I had to do was attribute some of Silas's lines to Matilda.
Yeah.
So in effect, they kind of became. There was still differences between the two of them, but she quite often spoke in his desires became hers as well. And then within that, there are three other characters that are mentioned: Jack Brockett, Matilda's cousin; Abrahams, who comes at the end, the ghost, who creates the ghost ceremony. There's those two particularly. So
you have those two, yeah.
Yeah, I have those two, and they felt very integral. But I had an idea early on that because this is a recounting, this is a memory play, it's a memory story. It's Silas retelling this event that happened to him, or in our play, it was Silas and Matilda recounting this. It made sense that we could use Matilda to transform into those characters in telling of the story. So the actress Jade Williams, who was playing Matilda, would become Jack Brockett, and then she became Abrahams at the end. And that device was really, it actually worked brilliantly, and I think it really gave it the sense of this memory play that they're together retelling this story that this, for them, a tragic story that happened to them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you get by virtue of splitting the narrative and parsing it out between the two main characters is that you can get to explore that shared interest that they have in the supernatural, which doesn't really come out in the original story. But it also means that you can, I think, be a bit more playful with the character of Silas himself. And Ed, your version of Silas was, I think, maybe a little bit more cowardly.
How dare you? I mean, first of all, what's lovely about doing something like this is that it's completely brand new. So there's no precedent for it. And so the kind of take that you have on the character is very much of your own creation, even though there's so many clues because it's so vividly and brilliantly written. But I think there was a sense of fear, definitely, that he has about something, Silas. And I felt that was two things, or we developed that with Jade and with Phil over the time that we had to rehearse it and talk about the characters. And one was the obvious thing about that sense of slight imposter syndrome of having the money and the wealth and the house and the title, however invented that title is, and the heredity of all of that. But also the fear of there's a certain sense of loss that they had within it. And that was really interesting for us to develop within ourselves. To what extent it came from the story, it felt like it was there, but it felt that there was an opportunity for us to create and develop what that loss was, because no children have been mentioned within the story. And, we felt the fear that comes along with that, insofar as having an heir or having a continuation of success that Silas had in his life. And obviously a continuation of their obvious love for each other, but there's a hole, and I think the fear was something that filled that hole, and we felt that there was a great deal of kind of melancholy potentially within the story to be mined to some extent within it, so that it didn't just become a joke, because it was never going to last for an hour. It was just one joke. I've never known a joke which can last for an hour. So what was lovely was that sense of having enough pathos within it, within that sense between Jade and I and between the characters as a couple, to be able to hold this story together to drive the narrative. And yeah, so I suppose I think I'm just naturally quite cowardly. I think most things they come across quite cowardly, but I didn't just try and play cowardly.
No. No, you didn't. And as I said earlier, this was a promenade performance, so you walk around with the audience, or the audience follows you around the Stanley Arts venue, and in fact, you're the first person that the audience meets in that. Silas welcomes everybody to Gorsthorpe Grange. Did that, the promenade nature of the performance, create any particular challenges or opportunities for you?
Well, it's always it's kind of exciting and daunting to be both tour guide and actor at the same time. And there's always a challenge, because when you're looking at people in the eyes and talking to them in direct address, there's always that sense where you get an immediate reaction as an actor about whether you're doing a good job or not. Because they might be bored or sleeping or reading the paper, as I've found in some plays that I've done, or and you can tell if they're with you or not. And you don't want to embarrass them too much. You don't want them to feel like they're on the spot too much. You want them as an audience to feel like one body moving around a space. Yeah. You don't want to isolate people so much, and you want everyone to feel like they're one person in it, so they're all getting the same experience. So that's one thing. What's wonderful about it is that you have a responsibility, which is a really delightful responsibility to have, where you're taking people around your house. So even though this story is so old and is from a certain time, the fact that we made Stanley Arts look and feel in the best that we could, and Phil and the design team did an extraordinary job in making it look and feel like Gorsthorpe Grange would have felt. And so there's that sense of immediate connection that you can have with the audience, a domestic connection, which leads into the stories and the relationships, both between Matilda and Silas, but with all the characters that Matilda then plays, where they hopefully felt more connected to, because they were within the space with us. And so having that sense of connection with them from the very beginning, where I'm taking them both through the house, but also taking them through our memories and through our feelings within those memories, was really special. I really, really love that. And I've never done anything like that before.
I think it's wonderful that you can create such an immersive experience in this kind of way. And, there's a fine line, which I think you exploited very well in the production, between, sort of making sure that people were in a mood to enjoy themselves and be entertained, but also, slightly trepidatious, slightly on edge. And there was a moment actually quite early on, I think, when we had toured to the part of the building that was representing the Dodds bedroom, and a couple of the audience members were taken away to investigate one of the ghostly noises that appears to have spooked Silas.
Did you get taken down the corridor?
I didn't, and I think there were two people were taken out of the audience at that point and taken away from the rest of the group. And I did wonder afterwards, was that were they plants in the audience, or were they sort of genuine audience members?
When you go, just to go back to when you were saying that Silas was cowardly, one of the scenes that really jumped out when I was adapting the story was that scene, which he does recall between him and Matilda, where his description's brilliant. Of they hear a noise in the bedroom, and he jumps under the covers and is so excited, but yet terrified, and he cannot bring himself to go and investigate. So he sends Matilda, and it was that moment that I was like, that's the relationship that I need to bring out. That he's cowering in the bed, and he's like, you go. So I had to definitely include that moment. But the location within the Stanley Arts, which became the bedroom, I chose that location purely because off the side of there, and it's unfortunate you didn't get to go down there, Mark, but off the side of there is this incredibly strange, pointless, yet really spooky corridor, which has got really low ceilings. It's got exposed brick. It's completely pitch black. There's like an inch of dust on the floor.
Oh, wow.
And when it's lit just by candles, which we took the audience down there with candles, it was so terrifying. They have no idea why that corridor exists at the Stanley Arts. It just does exist. Anyway, we had to use it. I wish I could have taken more of the audience down there, but health and safety wouldn't allow it. But yeah, that's why that happened.
Oh, that's brilliant. And it's worth saying that as much as you took advantage of all the natural sort of Edwardian features of Stanley Arts, you also took advantage of a modern accessibility lift that was sort of obtrusively in the middle of the building.
Yeah, I'll do that. So we'd got to a certain point within the story where, if I remember rightly, I've met Jack Brockett, and he has assured me that he will find somebody that can get us a ghost. And buoyed up by this, I can't remember exactly the line, but it's something like, buoyed up by the enthusiasm by which my agent had undertaken his commission, it made me rise, or something.
Yeah.
And we needed to get upstairs to get to the next location for the opening of the letter from Jack Brockett, when he sent a letter saying that he has found somebody. So we needed to get upstairs, and there were stairs, but there was also an accessibility lift. And I don't know whose idea it was. I think it was probably Phil's idea, because he's got that kind of sense of humour, which sort of we've got.
It was, yeah. I mean, the moment in rehearsal was very much like, well, this is the Stanley Arts is Gorsthorpe Grange, so Silas Dodds has a lift.
Yeah,
let's use it. We can't ignore this big red accessibility lift. But and it also chimed in with Silas's character that he would take this lift and make the audience walk up the stairs.
That's true.
It also moved so slowly that it was just very funny watching Ed ascend in a very slow way.
He even gave me a lantern to hold whilst I was in the lift, very still, so I could hold this lantern by my face as everyone's kind of up the stairs next to me up the lift. And then, of course, we had a problem because it wouldn't always open. It had like a knack. It was one of those things. It had a personality. So there was a certain way. You press the button once, it wouldn't open. You press it twice, it wouldn't open. And then sometimes on the third time you press the button, it would actually open. I think it was on a timer or something. So we had a couple of. We practiced many times, but it never ever opened in the same way twice. And there was always a slight panic that it would never open. We'd have to do the rest of the play from me one side of the lift and Jade the other side of the lift. But thankfully that never happened. No, it was a lovely moment, that. And then it also acted as a kind of hiatus, which was within the story, when basically they're waiting for this letter to come. So it aided to that sense of hiatus, which then we could break with Matilda, who's just played, or Jade, who's playing Matilda, who's also just played Jack Brockett, playing Matilda again, coming running up the stairs saying, "Oh, I've received a letter from Jack." And so we were able to then kind of shift the momentum and the energy of the piece up to the top room for the next stage of the story.
Yeah, and from there the audience then moves fairly quickly to the sort of, I think, the main stage area of Stanley Arts, which is where the ghost summoning ceremony takes place, and this is where you took advantage of this wonderful resident dance crew for the appearances of the ghost. So Phil, tell us a bit about how that sequence was conceived.
Yeah, I mean, because in the story, Silas is visited by, well, he drinks this potion that Mr. Abrahams gives him, and he's visited by 6 ghosts. So there was a huge question of how do I portray these ghosts? And I mean, they're so vivid in the story. The descriptions of them are incredibly vivid and very specific. And I have listened to your podcast about this episode, about the story, which was really illuminating in terms of like where the references are coming from in a historical literature sense. And they also have dialogue. So I just had this awful like worry. It's like, well, I can't have 6 actors with sheets over their heads going, ooh, and like, I don't know. And then, yeah, looking at Bird Gang's work, who are the hip hop dance group, there's a real otherworldliness to their work. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, I mean, that's great. That's a no-brainer to me. It's like, what better way to end the show for me than a 15-minute hip-hop ghost dance show? And then they are extraordinary. The way they move is physically is extraordinary and otherworldly. And they did an amazing job of creating these very, very different ghosts. And also because it is a retelling, it's still a memory play, and I kept having to go back to this time and time again. Like this is a memory. This is their memory of the ghost. So they're not living this for the first time.
No.
And it is well, the original story very much points that the effects of the leucoptolicus that they drink is a hallucinogen that potentially triggered these visions. So, yeah, having them portrayed as in this dance form made total sense to me.
Yeah, and this is a really immersive bit of the show because at this point the audience is all sat in a U. There's a large chair in the centre in which Ed is sitting as Silas Dodd, and the audience is sat around in this U shape. There's little test tubes of leucoptolicus in front of us to be able to take, and as the Dodds are recounting this, it's their memory of the event. You know, we as an audience are experiencing it for the first time. I have to say that, you know, the ghosts appear out of nowhere, and one of them, the American blood curdler, came out from underneath the table at which I was sitting, which almost scared me half to death.
Mm-mm.
Were you sat at the back then, behind the chair? Is that where
I was, yeah.
Oh, right, yes. So oh my God, yeah, that would have frightened me. Wow, yeah. No, he's is he one of the founder members, Phil Kenji?
I think he is, yeah.
Yeah, what he did, I found myself never having collaborated with dancers to this extent ever before, certainly with this kind of style of dance before. Seeing what they did and how they told stories through dance, and also how they were able to tell this very specific story of these very specific kind of ghosts in the way that they did was unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable to behold. And I found myself all through when we were teching it and rehearsing it, just kind of making involuntary noises. I was so impressed with what they were doing, because this is something I never ever thought, we could do. And it was, I think, the greatest treat really of this whole experience was to be able to work with and behold the kind of work that they produce.
Yeah.
Did this side appeal? I mean, and I'm kind of asking this to both of you in a way. Did this part of the story, the fact that from a dramatic perspective, the way the story is told, that Doyle is kind of spoofing the whole audition process. And did that kind of ring bells with you? And I thought, oh, you can really work with this scene because it's kind of, again, having fun with the idea that the whole thing is almost the story itself is almost a performance story, and this section it's almost the audition comes at the end rather than at the beginning, and you can play about with all those ideas.
Yeah, well, if I may, Phil, you were very clear that there was to be a certain different reaction to each ghost, but it was still denying them from my perspective, still denying them the opportunity to be the ghost. Because there had to be a sense up until the final ghost, I don't want any of those ones. They're either too scary, or or I think with the Cavalier, we decided he was a little bit too up himself. We didn't want someone who was a little bit more alpha than me in the room. So I didn't. And others that were just too terrifying, and some which were disembodied as well. So I didn't want them. And I think, with months of development, you could make whole scenes around that sense, as you say, around that whole sense of audition. And I think that you could create a great deal of comedy and a sense of modernity as well about that sense of auditioning. But we tried to do it as best we could, whilst not disturbing the flow of the actual work that they were doing, but still have, no, not you. But then when the final ghost comes, who's perfect, to make a real sense of a delight over the fact that finally, yes, I choose this one. The reasons why she's perfect are up for debate, but she was the one, and we made that as clear as we possibly could. But always under this whole thing about memory play, but also being in the moment, and also being under the influence of Leucoptolicus, whatever that was. There were lots of things to try and balance to make sense of the story, whilst trying to make it clear to an audience as well. But yeah, I think that sense of audition was clear and quite fun for us to work with.
Yeah. So how was how did it go down? I mean, it was performed on how many nights was it? Was the show performed?
It had a limited run of 9 performances. That was all. It went down really well as a show. People were really drawn to the story. I think as a kind of immersive, site-specific show, I think people were spooked as well. The tension was built throughout it. I think they found it very funny. Some of the depth of reaction really took me by surprise, and as from what I thought was one long joke, but what we ended up creating, and from what Ed was referring to earlier about this couple's need to populate the house with an apparition, and where does that come from? And I think in rehearsals early on, it became very clear to me that this was to compensate for their lack of a child, and that's not. In some ways, that is us imposing something onto Conan Doyle's story that wasn't there, but I think when you play the story out, that becomes very apparent that there is no mention of children. So what became at the very end, when the whole thing is a hoax and there were no ghosts or no visions, and Abrahams has completely cleaned them out and they've been robbed by him, there was really a sense of heartbreak at the end for this couple that invested everything into this dream of theirs, and then for it to be taken away, and more so than to have lost everything. It was quite moving. But then we also had some audience members who attended who work for St. Christopher's Hospice in Norwood, and we invited them to come and to see our last dress rehearsal. And their feedback was really moving in terms of like what Silas and Matilda experienced, where they were promised something with the afterlife. They were promised this would be something, and then it was taken away and it wasn't. They said a lot of their residents have very similar experiences when it comes to death, where they are told it's one thing, and it's not that, or there is this crushing disappointment, or something. Particularly relatives of people who died. And it was just, I didn't expect this short, witty story to impact as profoundly on people as it did. So yeah, I was thrilled with what it became.
That's really special. I think that, and once Conan Doyle has written it, it's out of his hands, and you've added an extra layer to it, which I thought worked really well. And I thought the ending you managed to wrap up very nicely indeed, because of course you've got to land the punchline. We've been robbed, but you also want to conclude this melancholy that you've added to the story as well. And I thought you managed to knit those two together really, really well in the ending. So does the positive audience reaction give you hope that you might be able to run this again, or is it the fact that it's site specific make it difficult to remount elsewhere?
Well, actually, I've been referring to it in this interview as site specific, but actually when I approached the Arts Council, I used the term site responsive, which I still think is the case with this. I genuinely think this could be restaged in any building without too much difficulty. So I think one of the kind of most ambitious ideas to give it a further life would be some kind of tour around heritage buildings or National Trust properties where we can turn that building into Gorsthorpe Grange. And it doesn't need a huge amount of set. If you've got an amazing building, then you just say to an audience, this is Gorsthorpe Grange, then that is Gorsthorpe Grange. Yeah. And whatever rooms they have, we take them through, I think it could be a way of celebrating buildings and creating an entertaining show and giving this little known story a bit of life.
And that ties in beautifully as well with kind of Conan Doyle's original intent, almost, with the story about with Dodd and his instant ancestors and this kind of thing, that actually we all share this heritage. It doesn't just belong to the people who built these buildings and the families who originally lived in them. Now, a lot of this stuff belongs to us all. And this is what Doyle's saying about about social mobility and all these kind of themes, and the idea you've just expressed about touring it around heritage locations would just fit in with that absolutely perfectly.
Well, I like that. That's great.
I think you've written the forward for the new.
I think it also. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
It also ties in with, and I'm sure you've both been struck by this with the original. Again, how modern a writer Conan Doyle is, and how clever a writer, and how his work does adapt so easily, and how we can, it speaks to us very, very easily.
Well, like all timeless writers that Phil have worked with as actors, and when we were at drama school, they last, Shakespeare, etc. They last speak about the human condition, speak about what it is to be a human being, and Conan Doyle was able to access that. And that sense of imposition that Phil was talking about, it never felt within the text that we had, which was adapted but was not kind of overly fabricated from the story. I think you agree. It never felt like we were lying to Conan Doyle, that we were asking anything of him that wasn't or wouldn't necessarily be there. That was very important to me and to Phil and to Jay to make to know that the story was being upheld. And even though we had a hip hop dance group, and we were in Norwood and a Stanley Arts Centre and all that, and it was 2024, we were still telling his story, and it felt like that. Especially the relationship between Matilda and Silas, that was the thing for me that really gelled it together. The thing that I think I'm most proud of within it from an artistic point of view as an actor, and that's down to him, down to the writing that we had, because it has that sense of interpretation, but it also has that sense of heart, which is just to everybody. One thing, if I may, I'm quite interested in is that, because I'm relatively ignorant about Conan Doyle, what was his interest in the supernatural, and how did it manifest?
He really he had it from childhood, and he was brought up by Jesuits. He went to school in Stonyhurst in Lancashire, so his Catholic background already gave him a feeding into that world, but he was never happy with the organized religion side of Catholicism, and lost his faith as a schoolboy, and then spent the rest of his life trying to find a faith. And became interested in a large number of different spiritual disciplines, and became interested in theosophy, spiritualism, different world religions, and worked his way through this. And at the end, spiritualism was where he finished up. And after the First World War, but he declared his absolute belief in spiritualism in 1916. And after the First World War, he spent much of the remainder of his life being the leading apostle for spiritualism, on an international stage. And he was absolutely fascinated by it, and it became the central tenet of his life. And it's always been this kind of irony around Doyle, that he creates one of the most rational characters in Sherlock Holmes, and yet he has this deep belief and interest in the supernatural throughout his life. And again, it's part of the fascination of the man.
Does that in Selecting a Ghost to an extent, doesn't he? I mean, he's
yes,
this opportunity for something. I mean, I've always thought, if I actually saw a ghost, what it would mean, what it means if you actually properly see all the connotations that has in so many different realms would be extraordinary. It would be a kind of life-changing thing. And he has that sense of opportunity within the story, but then he denies everyone of it and makes a comedy out of it.
Big joke. This is again the joy with Doyle as a writer. He can play about with all these ideas. And you're still left with an opening of, it might have been the drug, but maybe he still leaves that little opening. If you want to believe, you can believe.
Well, we had that at the end of the play, didn't we, Phil?
Yeah, I didn't want it to be just the kind of clear-cut, rational, scientific explanation that is kind of presented in that letter from Miss MD Test Tube.
Yes.
Yes. I must confess. No, do you know what? I must confess that.
Don't tell them, Phil. Don't tell them.
I didn't twig that joke until I heard your episode on Selecting a Ghost, and neither of you referred to it. You said you kind of went, "We'll leave you to figure that out," and I remember going, "MD." Oh, it took me quite a while. So I felt. Yeah. Anyway, we cut that from the show. But what was it? Yeah. No, I definitely wanted the audience to leave with a, was it real? Was it not? Was it hallucination? Was it real? And we did a really nice thing where we after the final blackout, we brought up a little flash of the final ghost, just for the audience to see, just a little flash, and then disappeared again.
Yeah, I think it was a really smart move and a great way of ending the show. It really sort of ended the performance on a high. We're really close to time, so before we go, I'd just like to ask you both, what are you working on now, apart from obviously a tour of Selecting a Ghost, hopefully around the National Trust properties of the UK. What are you working on? So Phil, how about you?
I start rehearsals for a version of Antigone as an actor. That'll be starting in January, and will be performed at the Park Theatre in Finsbury Park. It's called Antigone on Strike, and it's a modern reworking of it.
Fantastic. And Ed?
I had my first day of rehearsal today for A Man for All Seasons, about the downfall of Thomas More, which opened in Bath in January and then tours Chichester, Malvern, Cheltenham, Oxford, Guildhall, Canterbury and Richmond up until kind of early March. So yeah, I had my first day today.
Oh, that sounds great. Well, congratulations to you both on what I thought was a really wonderful performance. I really enjoyed it, and I hope very much that we get to see it again on tour in the UK. So thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Well, it was great to have Phil and Ed spare the time to come onto the podcast. We're very grateful for their time, and it was lovely to be able to relive the performance. I'm only sad that you didn't get to see it.
Hopefully in the future.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be another opportunity to do so. But yeah, it was great to see somebody tackling a story as obscure but worth revisiting as selecting a ghost.
Yeah, and hopefully this will be a movement we're going to see in the future, that more dramatists and adapters will look at Doyle and look at the whole wider milieu of Doyle's writing, and we always love Sherlock Holmes. We're going to always do with good Sherlock Holmes, but wider Doyle, it'd be great to see more, and I think we will see more dramatists. Certainly, we'll look at his work and realise that it's easy to work with, it's easy to fashion.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see more of this, and as we see academia and the whole critical world looking at Doyle more closely, that this will begin to happen. That there will be this growing interest, and particularly with some of his Gothic stories, really appeal. They're very modern. They're going to appeal. They appeal to our age. We live in a Gothic age, and I think these stories will really begin to garner more and more attention.
Yes, well, let's hope that Phil and Ed are able to remount this production and maybe look into other stories by Conan Doyle that would be suitable for adaptation.
And the fact they also recognise that Doyle is actually he's a very funny writer.
Yeah, that's right, because that side of his writing is very often overlooked. So that brings us to the end of this episode. If you'd like to read the show notes, you can find them at doingsofdoyle.com. And if you're interested in becoming a patron or supporter of the show, you can also find information about that on the website. So, Paul, what are we doing on the next episode?
Next time, we are going to go back to the Lost World, having followed our exploring team up to the moment that they leave the shores of Britain. We're going to follow them to South America.
So, yes, we're both very much looking forward to doing that. So until then, it only remains for us to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we will see you in the new year.
We certainly will.
Goodbye.